think growth is a bit at a crossroads, especially before the November 5th election in the US. There is not much I can tell you about how this is going to play out. And of course, this affects global growth and domestic growth in the US, but also inflation, right? Because the re-election of Donald Trump could mean a lot more inflation in the US, and therefore the inability for the Fed to keep on with the loosening cycle. For the rest of the world, I see, there are real income effects that are quite positive because inflation is slightly going down and wage growth is a bit higher. So we see a bit more momentum, especially in Europe, but also in large emerging markets. That's also the case, by the way, in Southeast Asia or in Singapore, I am today.
In 2 weeks from now, we will have the U.S. presidential elections. The day after that, it will be the Federal Reserve and their meeting. What is your expectation from the Fed? Of course, it has kicked off its easing cycle with an upsized 50 basis points at last meeting. What do you expect this time around?
Well, look, it's going to be about testing the political independence because it's going to be right after the election. And as I just mentioned, for me, the main concern is that a return of Donald Trump would be a triple whammy for inflation, mostly because of tariffs. He's promised to deport 7.7 million people living on American soil, and that would be a negative labor supply shock. But also his interest in devaluating the dollar and reenacting the Plaza Accord. All of that together could bring a lot more inflation. And so I think the Fed will have to cut this time because none of that will be in place and inauguration only happens in January. But the main concern then is whether the Fed manages to cut every meeting between now and middle of 2025. So that means bringing the terminal rates to 3.5 or so, or whether they are stuck in the middle because inflation starts kicking in a little bit more. So this time, yes, a cut right after the election in the middle of high uncertainty. So I expect also a roller coaster on equity markets and all of that towards the end of the year, because no matter who wins, because of the release of a lot of the uncertainty. But for the Fed, it's either a very cool loosening cycle or something that is a bit more complicated.